First of all, on behalf of our team, I would like to welcome you all to our session, Offshore Aquaculture in Economic Modeling. And I would like to start by asking our panel to introduce themselves. Please.
Should I start? My name is Trine Lo. I am with DNB. We'll get back to that in a moment. I have been a commercial banker for a long time, both in Norway and internationally. And maybe the most interesting part of my history was 3 years in establishing and running the office in Santiago in Chile that our bank has. And now I'm responsible for, amongst others, globally the seafood and aquaculture business.
Thank you. Omar?
Sure. My name is Omar Alfi. From California, from Los Angeles. My background is in finance, first in investment banking, so similar to Trina, and then in private equity. I then got an MBA and found myself as an aquaculture entrepreneur, investing in this business that you're about to hear about.
Thank you. Thank you, Omar. As for me, Haidar, over the past 25 years, I've been involved into aquaculture and recently into algae culture also. We've been working to develop blue marine economy really into the region, in the Middle East, I would say, and where aquaculture and algae culture are the major components. Before we start our discussion, and on behalf of our panel, please allow us to really say big thanks to BioMarine Convention family for hosting us and enabling us to meet and discuss the future of our world through the BioMarine path. This is a unique opportunity. Thank you, Pierre. Thank you, Veronique, and your team. As we all know, offshore aquaculture is defined as aquaculture activities that are taking place in the open sea. It's not like the conventional aquaculture where it is inland. Despite the substantial opportunities for growth, the world is covered, most of the world is by water. Offshore aquaculture has not, in many parts of the world, developed at expected rates, nor it will develop as an industry unless it's viewed as an attractive investment. This is from a point of view of the investors and the lenders, of course. In general, financing has been difficult for many aquaculture businesses globally. It's a fact. And actually, our colleagues in the other panel were complaining about the byproducts. I'll tell you, aquaculture is also facing the same, but not except in Norway and other parts of the world. Elsewhere, we are sharing the same experience. According to the FAO and the World Bank, global population is expected to grow by another 2 billion to reach more than 9 billion in 2050. For global fish availability to meet projected demand, it is estimated that aquaculture production will need to double, more than double by mid-century. We are producing 70 million tons now, expected to grow to 100 million, the demand to grow to 100 million by 2030 and to 140 million tons by 2050, where this will come from. The Norwegian large-scale offshore aquaculture industry has been developing since the 70s to become a modern, internationally competitive industry of a major importance to the country. I am in Norway. I will not talk how important aquaculture to Norway, but I think all of you have heard, and you will hear a lot about this. Norway exports seafood to about 130 countries all over the world, of which aquaculture products account to approximately 60% of that. In 2015, just last year, the Norwegian fish farming production was 1.39 million tons, which first value, to those who are interested, is about 47 billion kroner. Very nice to know that the Fish Farmers Association, the Norwegian, of course, Fish Farmers Association, goal is to produce 2.7 million tons in 2025. Another million ton to be added. Very interesting facts about aquaculture industry in Norway. Norway is the world's leading producer of Atlantic salmon. Probably we know that. Norway is the second largest seafood exporter in the world after China. Norway is the base of the largest aquaculture company in the world. Norway is the home of the world's best aquaculture innovation and R&D institutions. We have seen, I will name some, Nofima, Centif, Imri, and the big names in aquaculture are really based here. Norway is the base of the world's largest offshore aquaculture operation. Norway is the house of the largest aquaculture financing institution, DNB, and we will be talking about it later. Norway has developed the world's best aquaculture strategy, among the best strategies. And when we talk about strategy in aquaculture, we always place Norway strategy as at the top. If someone wants to follow a good model, follow the Norwegian strategy. Norway is the house of the largest manufacturers of aquaculture systems in the world. Norway exports approximately 95% of its food production. It's not about food security. It's about business. Norway is where world's largest seafood exchange, as we heard this morning. And finally, fish is Norway's largest export after oil and gas. Norway is the world's leader with respect to expertise related to operation, technology, R&D in the field of aquaculture, and mainly, of course, offshore aquaculture. It is interesting to know that more than 1 billion Norwegian kroner are allocated each year from the Norwegian national budget to marine research. And today morning we hear about it is 1% of the national GDP, right? That's a great amount of money. So there are much more to say, but we are, Pierre is insisting on time, and Veronique warned us that we have to be out before our time is out. So over the next 20 minutes, we will get the opinion of our distinguished experts here, panel members, on their experience and knowledge on aquaculture, and mainly on offshore aquaculture industry. Trina, we'll start with you. Let us shortly start by requesting you to introduce DNB to our audience.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you.
DNB is the largest Norwegian bank and also the only Norwegian bank that has extensive global business. And I think given the kind introduction from Heidar, naturally the aquaculture industry is really one of our key industries. The Norwegian players in the farming industry, salmon farming industry, have been global players for a long time. And they've also been consolidating the industry, and our bank has been and played a major part in that process. Of the 10 largest players in the world, 7 are Norwegians, and we are banking them both in Norway, Chile, and in Canada. Salmon farming is the most industrialized segment, and that of course also means that there is a service and technology industry around this, which we also follow as a bank and support. This is, for example, also providers of feed and equipment. And as we heard this morning, 5 of the 25 largest companies on the Oslo Stock Exchange are aquaculture companies.
Thank you. Omar?
Sure, thank you,
Tell us
Heather.
about Pacifico Aquaculture, I would say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our company is called Pacifico Aquaculture. We're a startup aquaculture company based in Ensenada, Mexico, Baja California, about 70 miles from the border with San Diego in the US. So we're the only company in the world growing pure striped bass. We grow them in cages on a site 8 miles offshore at Todos Santos Island. The company's been around since 2009. My partners and I joined in 2013 as the primary investors and operators of the business. Initially, our focus was on building out production. We built our own hatchery. We produced several million juveniles in the first couple of years. We then learned and perfected our cage culture. We've now been focusing on sales and marketing of the product. Striped bass is a relatively well-known species in the US, so we don't anticipate huge hurdles.
Thank you. We'll talk later about, I see Trina is smiling. Okay, Trina, while very few lenders, it's a fact, internationally have shown interest about aquaculture, nor do they want to do so. And though a handful of private equity firms are making aquaculture investments, the amount, even they are doing, the amount of they are investing in is very small relative to the opportunities and demand. The same applies to venture capital and private equity sources. Aquaculture is not in their radar screen even. Despite that fact, aquaculture and seafood is a core strategy to DNB. How can you explain that?
As I said earlier, I think the salmon farming part of the industry has really now come to a more mature stage. And if you believe it or not, but in this part of the world, there is actually large competition among banks to be able to finance this part of the industry. It's still a young industry. I think it's important to remember that in terms of everything we discuss here today. Even the salmon farming is fairly young. You know, from the 70s, our bank started financing in the early 80s. We were also part of the ups and downs. We've gone through, you know, the really big and challenging times we had when restructuring the business, and we learned from that as a bank as well. What I'd like to say, particularly when we look at other types of capital coming in, the private equity players, where we see that they come in is normally on products where you get paid for the number of kilos produced and not being as exposed to the actual salmon price, which of course has been the challenge in the over time. But if you look at companies like Evas, who was actually sold for 30 billion Norwegian kroner, and the owners doubled their value over a couple of years, and you have Pharmac that was sold at 13 times their actually sales. So it tells you that there are certain parts of the industry which really has been both bankable and interested for large equity players. I think for us as a bank, we've heard some comments this earlier today. Where we see it's viable for a bank to go in is normally where we can follow industrial players, so where we see industrial players go in and also work with segments of other opportunities than the salmon farming. That's areas where we as a bank can go in. The challenging part for a bank is that normally, you know, we actually have very slight margins and no upside. So we need to go in where we can support businesses that has a stable cash flow. So you sort of need to get to that stage before a bank can actually be able to help. In that sense, I'd also like to give tribute to the Norwegian government, who has set up the development and license scheme, because I think that's one of the ways where we see that the government is helping support industrial players to actually put more money into research and development, and where we as banks and financial institutions can actually support in the development of the industry.
Thank you. Very interesting. A 40-year-old industry still a young industry. Other people in the world would say we have to wait 40 years before we double it. But I like what
Hopefully
you've said. Omar, in many parts of the world, probably you are living in that part of the world. Individuals considering commercial offshore aquaculture should be financially sound. Or they have to do it the old-fashioned way by sourcing funding from private individual, not institution. And once their business gone and they prove the profitability of the model, then financial institutions would step in and start work with them. Is it going to be the case with Pacifico Aquaculture?
I hope so. We'll see. We're expecting over 1,000 tons of production in the next year and expecting to be profitable sometime in the next 12 months. So once this is achieved, we hope that we'll start to get debt financing to look at our expansion capital and expansion opportunities. But you're correct that to start off, debt funding was not an option at all. I mean, we formed our own investor group when we saw this opportunity, and it was really formed of our friends and family, a very tight-knit group, because in the beginning it was a very risky endeavor, very risky investment. We set out a timeline, we set out goals of where we wanted to go, path to profitability. As we developed, as we reached milestones along that path, we were able to expand our investor group, find other equity investors, and slowly expand kind of the capital base of the business. But yeah, up until this point, as you say, as we were discussing earlier, debt financing is generally low-risk financing, whereas equity financing is the higher-risk financing. And so since we're a startup business in aquaculture in a new region, considered high risk, we've been focused on equity financing up until this point.
Great. Actually, where I come from, and I'm sure it's in many other parts of the world, aquaculture startups are receiving zero financing. I'm not aware of any project in our region that has been, till now, supported by financial institutions. So the gap is big where you are here and where else others in the world are doing. Trina, why we need economic modeling? Is this the best tool to provide confidence in a business plan? Would this tool help to bridge the gap information between industry and lenders, I would say, whatever the form of lender? Can we state that economic modeling is a viable tool for offshore aquaculture and should be included in the early stages of feasibility studies? Is it something that you are adopting here in Norway?
Yes, absolutely. And I think financial modeling is key to be able to test and show that a business is commercially viable. And I think from our side, as a bank, we both have and built our own models when it comes to the credit risk we take. We also have equity analysts. They build their own models to look at the upsides on the equity side. And I think just verifying and also addressing risk points in a business model, that's really where you will use the financial modeling. So I think this is key even from the very beginning of a business.
So it's a prerequisite, I would say.
I would say so. And if I can add a point, I think, of course, being in a market like, for example, salmon prices and having actually ideas and form opinions on the development of the price of salmon is a very big part of our decision making.
Great. Omar, to prepare the economic modeling, if you want to fulfill the requirements of the bankers, dealing with various economic and biological factors in a specific production process like species, technologies, location, risk, and so on, is essential, for sure. Where your project requested to prepare an economic modeling, where you come from? And what were the main forces or factors contained in your economic modeling?
Well,
did you do that first of all?
Yes, well, we started off as investors looking at a possible project to invest in. And one of the key tools, as Trina was saying, that we used to assess the business was an economic model. So we studied the business first, understood the key variables, what we thought were the key variables, financial and biological. And we built an economic model using those variables. Those are anything from price to volume to growth rate, yield, FCR, full range. And we need to understand those assumptions are key and critical to an accurate economic model. With that being said, the model is not the only thing that drives the decision. It's a key tool and a critical tool because it helps you assess the financial capability of the business. You stress test it up and down based on pricing, based on volume. So it helps you assess the scenarios and whether something is a good investment or not from an equity perspective or a debt perspective.
But your project is a startup and you finance that by your own, I would say. The investors did the finance. Or
yeah,
we
financed it all on our own through equity investment, but I would say the financial model is equally as important to us, maybe more important than it is for the debt financiers.
You didn't have a DNB, brand in Mexico? Or
I haven't encountered DNB in Mexico yet. Hopefully they'll be there soon banking us in a few years. Yeah.
Trina, what are the criteria that DNB requires in order to lend a startup aquaculture operation? A startup.
Yeah. I think, as I mentioned earlier, it's not possible for a bank to use the capital that we have borrowed from depositors to take risk that is not within the range where we can actually give returns on that. That's our business model. And that's why when business is risky and in early stages, it's really about equity. You can find certain pockets where the financing can be made less risky, like factoring, leasing, export credit agencies, niches within financing where you can be able to get financing earlier than pure bank debt. So that's something to look into. It's also, we can look into areas where we can reduce the risk, like takeout options or proven technology or other aspects that can take down the risk in the actual project or company that we're looking at. And of course, as I said, we evaluate owners and track record in the business that's been done. Even if it's somebody that comes from a different company and starts something new, of course, the experience we have with the owners and would really be important. One example that I can say is that we have followed the farming industry in Iceland for a long time, and we've viewed that as too risky, but now we know about at least 4 players that are going into that, Norwegian players that are going into that market, and that's a way for us to look at financing that industry again with partners that we've worked with and we know the track record of.
Again, it's a bit tricky.
Bit tricky.
Yeah. Omar, in your opinion, what are the major barriers to emerge the offshore? We are talking mainly about the offshore aquaculture industry in the world. For everybody's information, offshore aquaculture in the world is, compared to the overall aquaculture activities, is so teeny, though the potentials are far better than the other types of aquaculture. But despite that, it is facing probably some difficulties.
Yeah.
Where are they, and what is needed to emerge this industry?
Well, I want to start by saying that I'm definitely not an expert in this business. I've been in it for 3 years now, but more than 3 years ago, I didn't know much about seafood or aquaculture. But I like to say that for the last 3 years, I've been drinking from the fire hose, trying to learn as quick as I can. So from that fire hose experience, I'll tell you, I think the first thing is having a friendly government or a friendly environment to build a business. And that's for permits, that's for regulatory issues, for importing feed, importing other materials. But then beyond that, just the actual business model of aquaculture. I find maybe as an outsider, and as an outsider investor, it was a bit intimidating. And the reason for that, I'd say, number one, unproven biology, or just biology in general. Number two, heavy technical execution. Number three, long market acceptance in a difficult supply chain. And number four, heavy capital investment. So especially for offshore aquaculture, it's very expensive. And so what I mean by unproven biology is that for many species, for ours included, the reproduction cycle might not be fully known, cage culture might not be fully understood, nutrition might not be fully understood, disease risks and things like that, definitely not fully understood. So those are all risks that you have to quantify as an investor. That frankly, it's not very easy to quantify. Number two, technical execution. At least as an outsider, it's a business that's complicated. I mean, there's hatchery, which is very technical, very detail, biologically focused. There's the farm, which is, mariners, boats in the water dealing with nature. And then you're getting into processing and sales. So it requires heavy technical execution. And then you're selling into this opaque, long supply chain, especially in the US, in North America. It's very difficult to understand as an outsider. And especially if you're trying to sell a species or a fish that people aren't aware of. We're lucky that we're selling striped bass. People know it, and so it's easier to sell. And then on top of all that, this business costs millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars maybe. So it's a tough combination. But I think when you get it right, I hope at least, the dividends will pay off.
And I would add on top of that, that really for countries or regions where they are interested to develop the industry, I would say don't reinvent the wheel. Go to the Norwegian experience, study it, and start from that point. I know that there are a few countries, probably some of them are here, they are trying to develop their aquaculture strategies or offshore aquaculture strategies. Start where the Norwegians ended, because you can really save time.
You can learn a lot.
A lot, and save money.
Yeah.
Trina, will DNB consider supporting aquaculture industry, in particular the offshore aquaculture, because you are experts in that, in regions, countries where you don't have an official presence? Would this be possible?
I would say yes, but it's a case-by-case evaluation, and I think normally what we do is we follow our clients. So when we know a client, we'd work with them over time. If they go to a new geography or even to a new, species, we can support them, as a group or as a company to go into new areas. And I think that's the way we will also develop our business, to follow the future opportunities within aquaculture.
So can we say that Omar have an opportunity? Can he start?
In the future, when we're further along. I'll leave it there.
We still have 3 minutes? I can see. Okay. Omar, Trina, in 30 seconds each, please. What is necessary, in your opinion, to ensure that offshore aquaculture industry can attract the required capital to develop further in many parts of the world, beside Norway, of course?
Should I start?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think when developing new opportunities in new areas, I actually think that the government involvement and how they can support new initiatives on resources for a country or a region is going to be really important. And we had earlier comments in the panel about how to work, across regions. But the sea is everyone's sea, and I think having also governments cooperating in how this can be done, I think is really important. I think the industry needs attention from equity. There is a lot of, I don't think we've ever seen a world where there's been so much money waiting to be put into somewhere where you can yield a return. And I think getting the attention on pockets where you're starting to develop something that's slightly more mature and looks like it's going to be commercial viable business is where we need to look. And you will need the equity for a long period to be able to develop this. So how to attract equity, Oslo Stock Exchange, thinking about the small parts that they can play on the lower ranges if possible, just any way of how you can attract equity and get this business known.
And if you want to attract equity, come to Norway, set up your operation here. It will be easier. Omar?
Well, I definitely agree. The environment and the government is key, number one. Number two, I'd say that we didn't start this business, we found this business, and we found founders who had built the model, had worked with the species, had de-risked it a lot, and they'd started to set a path towards profitability. And they were able to convince us of that path towards profitability, us being the investors. We've now joined them as the operators, but I think the key is that my partners now, who are the founders, and now us as well, we've been able to tell the story to the investors of where we're trying to go and how we're trying to get there. And a lot of that has to do with minimizing risk wherever you can, however you can. Investment is all about risk reward. So telling them we're working with this species that has a lower market risk. We're working in this environment that has lower environmental risk, less waves, less wind, whatever it is, disease. Just quantifying the risk, having your milestones, and connecting the technical people with the investors. Because as you said, the key is equity financing in the beginning and then getting to debt financing. So learning how to speak to the equity financiers.
Yes. Yeah. And probably you are starting that offshore aquaculture in Mexico. It's not like starting it in Norway. You are starting from...
We're starting from scratch. Yeah, we're the only ones. Yeah.
So thank you very much, Omar, Trina. Thank you very much for your attention, and if you need to talk to any of us, please, we'll be available until tomorrow evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trina.